The bells of Eryndral never rang. High upon the palace spires they hung blackened with age, their mouths filled with melted iron to ensure they could never sound again. The streets below were no different. No market cries echoed through the stalls, no songs drifted from tavern doors, no children's laughter rang in the courtyards. The kingdom lived in silence. It was not the silence of peace. It was the silence of law. Every soul, from the lowest beggar to the king upon the throne, obeyed it. Words were not spoken. Voices were not raised. Instead, lives moved in gestures and looks, in written signs and quiet motions. In this realm, to speak aloud was death. The people of Eryndral did not know when the silence had begun. Their grandparents had known only the same stillness and their ancestors before them. Generations had passed with mouths closed, throats unused. Entire lineages were born, lived and buried without ever hearing the sound of their own voices. Even the midwives who delivered children into the world caught their cries swiftly in cloths, muffling them before the curse could awaken, because that was the truth whispered in hidden corners. Silence was survival. If words were spoken, something else would answer. The young scribe Eryndral knew this better than most. He walked the streets that morning with his satchel of parchment and quills, his eyes lowered as others passed. Merchants raised signs painted with symbols instead of calling wares. A woman with flour-dusted hands pressed bread into a boy's palms, taking his copper tokens with a nod, not a word. Even the soldiers in their iron helms gave orders with signals: a lifted hand, a clenched fist, 2 fingers drawn across the throat. The city was alive, but it moved like a dream without sound. Eryndral hated it. He had never said so, of course. He could not. But within his heart he burned with questions he dared not write. Why must silence be law? What curse was so powerful it chained the tongues of an entire people? And, most of all, was it truly real? His work in the royal archives gave him glimpses of answers. He had seen fragments of parchment, half-burned, locked away in iron chests. Words that spoke of a time when voices carried across the land, when kings ruled not by hand signs but by command. Songs once filled halls, oaths were sworn aloud, lovers whispered secrets in the dark. It was not myth, it was memory. And then the silence fell. He did not know how or why. The fragments always ended the same way: cut short, the ink burned, the pages defaced. But one phrase recurred again and again in the scraps he had found, scrawled as though in terror: "Do not speak, for the demons listen." Eryndral did not know if he believed in demons. He had never seen one. But his mother's eyes had turned cold when, as a child, he had dared to mouth her name. She had slapped him hard and pressed her hand over his lips, trembling until he wept in fear. He never tried again. And yet the hunger inside him remained. That morning, as he crossed the square before the silent cathedral, he felt the tension in the air before he saw it. People stood frozen, eyes wide, hands clutched to mouths. Eryndral pushed through the crowd and saw what held them. At the center of the square stood a man, a stranger. His clothes were torn, dust from the road clinging to him. His eyes were wild, his face gaunt, but it was his mouth that held them all in terror, because he was speaking. The sound was broken, rasping, but unmistakable. Words. "Hungry, so hungry, help me." The syllables shattered the air like glass. Elric's blood turned to ice. He had never heard a voice before, not truly, not outside of dreams and his own imaginings. It was rough, terrible, alien, and it shook him to the core. Then the ground trembled. From the stones of the square rose shadows, seeping upward like smoke. They thickened, twisted, and took form, jaws too wide, limbs too long, eyes that burned with hunger. The demons. The crowd scattered in silence, mothers clutching children, men dragging wives toward the alleys. But the demons did not chase them. They circled the stranger, drawn to the sound still spilling from his lips. The man fell to his knees, weeping, begging. His voice cracked, echoing in the hollow square, and with each word the demons swelled larger. The king's guards surged forward in iron ranks, crossbows raised. Their captain gave the signal, an arm chopping downward, and a volley of bolts struck the stranger. He fell with a strangled cry, the last sound he would ever make. As silence reclaimed the air, the demons writhed, shrieking in soundless agony, and then melted back into the stones from which they had come. The crowd slowly crept back, their faces pale, their eyes wide. None spoke, not even in whispers, but Elric saw the truth in their gazes. They had all heard it. The curse was real, and it had teeth. That night, Elric could not sleep. He lay in his chamber in the scribe's quarters, staring at the ceiling, his mind consumed. He had heard a voice. He had seen demons rise. The old warnings were no longer fragments in burnt parchment. They were alive. But beneath his fear, a deeper hunger stirred. For even as the stranger's words had doomed him, they had carried a power unlike anything Elric had ever known. The silence of the world was vast, crushing, eternal. But a single word had shattered it. He whispered into the darkness, lips moving though no sound escaped. One day, he told himself, he would break the silence too. And when he did, the kingdom would never be the same. The stranger's execution had left the city quivering with fear. For days after, the square where he fell was avoided, as if the stones themselves still carried his voice. No one wrote of it, no one dared sign or gesture about it, but the memory clung to the people like frost. They had seen the demons answer. They had watched silence save them again. Elric, however, could not let it rest. He spent his nights in the archives, searching the vaults where the old texts lay buried beneath dust. He found more fragments, charred scrolls, torn ledgers, lines of ink etched in languages older than his own. And in every scrap the pattern returned. Silence is survival. Speech is death. But what struck him most was not the warning itself. It was that before the silence there had been no fear of words at all. People had spoken freely, beautifully. Words had been life. Something had stolen that life away. On the seventh night after the execution, the silence was broken again. It began at the southern gates, where a caravan arrived from the borderlands. The guards let them through, inspecting their goods in the usual voiceless routine. But one man lingered at the back of the group. His hair was long, his eyes bright with something half-mad. He looked at the guards, at the silent city beyond, and then, with a smile, he spoke. "Why do you live like this?" The words cut the air like a blade. The guards froze. The merchants recoiled, covering their mouths with both hands. The man laughed, a sound rich and deep, terrible in its freedom. "Does no one here remember the gift of the tongue?" he called louder now, his voice echoing off the stone walls. "Do you not know you are prisoners of your own silence?" The ground shuddered. Shadows rose. From cracks between the cobblestones the demons came again, tall, writhing, jaws dripping with hunger. The guards rushed forward with their crossbows, but the man only spread his arms wide and shouted, "Come then! Feed on me if you dare! My words will burn you!" And to Elric's horror the demons did not devour him. They recoiled. The air hissed as if his words were fire on their flesh. They shrieked in voices that clawed at the mind, retreating into the dark as he laughed. For the first time in living memory, words had not only summoned the demons, they had driven them back. The man strode into the city as the guards, shaken, did not stop him. Behind him, whispers without sound rippled through the crowd. Some trembled in fear. Others stared in awe. Elric felt both in equal measure. That night the kingdom stirred. Silent gatherings met in hidden corners, scribbling frantic notes to one another. Could it be true? Could words hold not only death, but power? Was silence not the whole truth, but a prison crafted from fear? The council of nobles, shaken, gathered in the palace. Their signs and gestures were frantic, their faces pale. The king himself sat still, crown heavy upon his brow, his eyes shadowed with unease. Into their midst the stranger was dragged, unbound, smiling even as soldiers held him. He did not bow. He did not kneel. He simply looked at them all and said, "Your silence is a lie. You have been made slaves by your own fear. But I have seen beyond the borders. I know the truth. Words are not a curse. They are a weapon." The council erupted in furious gestures, demanding his death. But before the king could give the signal, the stranger spoke again. His voice cracked like thunder through the chamber, each word making the torches flicker. "Demons do not come for words alone. They come for weakness. They come for silence. Your fathers struck a bargain to bind you in chains, and you have lived as prisoners ever since. But the curse can be broken. I am proof of it." Elric was among the scribes ordered to record the trial. His quill shook in his hand as he wrote, his eyes fixed on the man's mouth as it formed words. He could not deny what he had seen. The demons had recoiled. And now, hearing the stranger's voice fill the vaulted chamber, he felt something stir within him, a longing so fierce it was almost pain. The king, after a long silence, raised his hand. The verdict was clear. The stranger would be executed at dawn. But that night the city did not sleep. In taverns where no music had played for centuries, men and women mouthed silent questions to one another, their eyes wide with fear and hope. Children, emboldened by what they had seen, whispered to one another in the dark, their voices thin but real. And in the royal archives, Elric traced the words he had recorded, feeling his lips move silently, daring himself to imagine the sound. When dawn came, the stranger was led to the square where the first had died. The gallows stood waiting, black against the sky. Thousands gathered, their faces drawn, their hearts divided between terror and curiosity. The guards bound the man's hands, but still he smiled. "Kill me if you will," he said, his voice carrying across the hushed crowd. "But know this, the curse is breaking. The silence cannot hold forever, and when the last chain snaps, your voices will return, whether you wish it or not." The executioner pulled the lever. The rope snapped taut. The man's body fell still, but his final words lingered in the air, heavier than silence. And that night, for the first time in living memory, voices whispered in secret across the kingdom. Elric was just a humble scribe copying ancient texts, or so he'd thought until the day the stranger came to town. Someone had brought a dangerous idea to the king of Eryndral, and now the man lay dead in the town square, his head resting on the very spot where he'd spoken his final words. Silence is a lie. They are not our gods. We are the children of voices. Those words echoed through the town square, burrowing into the minds of Elric and everyone else who'd heard them. Now the people lived in fear of what might happen should they break the silence. But Elric couldn't stop thinking about those words. Could the stranger have been right? Was silence truly a lie? And if so, why had the king killed the man? Why was the kingdom so afraid? Elric delved into the archives, stealing bits of forbidden lore here and there until he uncovered an ancient chronicle. It contained the shocking truth about their predicament, and Elric now raced against time to uncover the whole story before the demons claimed him as their own. Now, when we last saw our hero, he discovered a chronicle that told how the kingdom was once full of noise. That was until their king made a deal with demons, trading his people's voices in exchange for power. When he read those words, everything changed. The pages went up in flames, his house became a prison, and he met a cloaked figure who spoke to him of power, promises, and peril. Elric emerged from his hiding place clutching the stolen book. As always, his steps were careful, his movements swift, his eyes sharp and assessing. How long had it been since he'd risked being seen? Days, weeks, months? Time flowed differently now, measured not in sunshine and moonlight, but in snatched moments of freedom and stolen breaths of air. He didn't dare turn back. There was no telling when the shadows would reach out and pull him back into the suffocating darkness. But ahead lay the tangled wilds of Whisperwood. Beyond that, perhaps, lay hope. He moved between trees gnarled as old men, their branches clawing at the sky. Above, the wind sighed through leaves that rustled like secrets. There was a sound, a soft murmur like the hush before a great roar. It seemed to come from everywhere and nowhere. Elric paused, listening. Had he truly heard? Or did the silence play tricks on his memory? Memories of the Chronicles swam before his eyes. What if the whispers were the antidote? What if sound was the cure? But suddenly, a guttural bark split the supposed silence and snarling shapes dropped down from the trees. Wolves, their fur the color of ash, their eyes burning coals. Elric stumbled back, pressing himself against a moss-covered trunk. Then one of the wolves stepped forward. Her gaze locked onto his, and in her eyes he saw not hate, but curiosity. She tilted her head, ears perked, and took a step closer. Elric froze, unsure whether to flee or stand his ground. More wolves joined her, circling him, their murmurs rising like a chorus. Then she spoke. Her voice was rough as stones, but musical nonetheless. "We have not heard that song in many years," she said. "What brings you to Whisperwood?" Elric hesitated. Could he trust these creatures? He had no choice. "I seek the Whisperers," he replied, forcing his voice steady. "They say that even in silence, some voices can be heard." The wolves exchanged glances. Their gazes were intense, unnerving. Finally, one of them spoke. "Follow us," she said, turning away. "If you would seek the Whisperers, then follow." And so Elric followed, navigating the shadowy woods under the cloak of perpetual twilight. The wolves moved like wraiths through the trees, silent and swift. As the forest grew darker, the whispers grew louder, swirling around him, weaving tales of forgotten lore. When the path ahead became too treacherous, the wolves vanished into the gloom, reappearing moments later in new shapes. Were they guiding him, testing him, or leading him into a trap? They emerged into a clearing bathed in silvery light. Before him stood a circle of ancient trees, their branches entwined overhead, forming a canopy that shut out the darkness. Beneath them gathered a group of figures cloaked in white robes, their faces hidden by hoods. This was the Whisperers, legendary guardians of Eryndral's fading lore, and Alaric's memories stirred. Fragments of stories from countless ages past. Legends said that the Whisperers spoke in whispers, communicating secrets only to those who could hear, and indeed, as Alaric approached, he heard their voices, faint but clear, weaving a tapestry of ancient magic. "So, you found us," said one of the Whisperers, stepping forward. "We have been expecting you, child of echoes." Elric stopped, taken aback by the sudden recognition. "How did you know I was coming?" he asked, his voice barely a whisper. The Whisperer gestured to the clearing. "The trees told us you were here, as do the winds, the waters, and the very stones beneath our feet." Elric's mind reeled. "So, you hear all things?" he asked, awestruck. "We hear what others cannot, or will not," replied the Whisperer. "We hear the songs of creation, the whispers of the old ones, the lamentations of the damned." Elric stepped closer, his eyes shining with determination. "I have come to learn the lost words," he said, "to break the curse of silence that plagues my people." The Whisperer nodded, their gaze piercing. "You seek the antidote to the silence, the words that bind rather than break," they said, their voice echoing with wisdom beyond mortal ken. "They are here, child of echoes, but they are guarded by ancient magic, held within the heart of this very wood." Before Elric could respond, a sudden tremor shook the clearing. The trees swayed violently, their branches crashing to the ground. From the depths of the forest, a guttural growl echoed. The whisperer raised their hand, their gaze fixed on the tree line. "It senses your presence," they said grimly. "The guardian of the grove. If it attacks, our powers will not hold it." The whisperer turned to Elric, their expression grave. "You must face it alone," they said. "Only you can unlock the words that bind." Taking a deep breath, Elric stepped forward. He reached out to touch one of the ancient trees, and as his fingers brushed against its bark, a surge of energy coursed through him. He closed his eyes, listening intently. Through the tree, he heard the rhythm of the forest, the pulse of life that thrummed beneath the surface. The growling grew louder, and from the shadows emerged a creature of immense size and power. Its form shifted and writhed, taking on aspects of wolves, serpents, and claws. And with eyes blazing like molten gold, it lunged. Fear threatened to consume Elric, but he stood his ground. Drawing strength from the whispers of the ancient trees, he focused his will and cried out. His voice echoed through the clearing, and at that moment he felt the bonds of the curse weakening. The creature faltered, and with a final burst of power, Elric shattered the last vestiges of silence. His voice rang out, clear and strong. "I am the voice of Eryndral," he proclaimed, "and I break the silence." As his words echoed through the land, the creature let out a deafening roar and collapsed, dissolving into dust and shadow. With the curse broken, the whisperers emerged from their hiding places. They looked to Elric with gratitude and admiration. "You have done it, child of echoes," they said, their voices filled with awe. "You have freed us from the shackles of silence." And so, in the heart of Whisperwood, surrounded by the ancient magic of the trees, Eryndral's curse was broken. The people were free to speak once more, and the kingdom echoed with the sound of their voices. But as for Elric, he knew his journey was far from over. With the curse lifted, new challenges awaited, and he was ready to face them, his voice ringing with newfound confidence. And so ends our tale of Elric, the boy who broke the silence and saved his kingdom. So, how do you like the story? Let me know in the comments below. Thanks for watching. See you next time. I thought this was going to be it. I thought I'd finally done it, but turns out I just unlocked another part of hell. Okay, we're back in the Silent Kingdom because I did not get my happy ending last time, and frankly, neither did you. I don't usually say this, but please come in with trigger warnings for this one. If you don't remember what happened last time, there is a link below to the playlist. But basically, we are in a world where the only way to defeat demons is to speak a forbidden language. But it's so hard to do that everyone has forgotten about it, and even more so because the king has put a curse on the tongue. Now, the people live in terrified silence until one rebel leader named Lot tries to help his friend Elric escape the kingdom. But, halfway through, he decides he doesn't want to risk hurting Elric or putting the rebellion at risk, so he lets Elric run off alone. So, now our story begins. The stranger's execution had not silenced the whispers. It had inflamed them. Across the city, voices stirred like sparks hidden in ash. Some spoke in secret, daring only a word before choking on fear. Others tested the forbidden tongue deliberately, whispers stretching into sentences in the safety of locked rooms. And with each voice, something stirred in the shadows. The curse was breaking. Elric felt it everywhere. By day, in the markets, he saw mothers slap children silent before anyone could hear. By night, he heard murmurs bleeding through the walls of the scribe's quarters. Once, crossing the cathedral square, he caught the faint sound of a hymn, an ancient melody carried on a trembling voice before it vanished in a scream. The air itself seemed heavier now, pressing down on the city as though the silence struggled to hold. But the truth burned inside him. He had seen Lord Malrek speak with impunity, had read the chronicles of the king's betrayal. The silence had never been protection. It was control. And now, with the seals weakening, the demons returned. It began in the villages first. Messengers from the countryside staggered to the gates, wide-eyed and blood-stained. Children had begun to mutter in their sleep, and when parents tried to hush them, the children did not wake. They were dragged away into the dark. In farmsteads, men who cursed aloud saw their barns swallowed in shadow. But the reports carried more than horror. Some rebels had learned fragments of words that did not summon demons, but drove them back. One village claimed a boy had spoken a single phrase that set the monsters to flight. Another whispered of a woman who sang to keep the shadows from entering her home. The city grew restless. The nobles demanded harsher punishments, more executions, more fear. The king hid deeper in his palace, silent and still as stone. But among the common folk, voices began to rise in defiance. One night, Elric followed them. He slipped through alleys into the forgotten Undercity, where old tunnels wound beneath the streets. There he found them, a gathering of men and women, cloaks pulled tight, faces hidden, but mouths moving. They spoke in whispers, testing words like blades, their voices raw from disuse. At their center stood a figure with eyes alight. "You have been lied to," the man said, his voice steady, unbroken. "Silence was never our salvation. It was our prison. Words summon demons, yes, but words can also bind them. We must learn. We must reclaim what was stolen from us." The sound of his voice made Elric's skin prickle. He felt the weight of the air, the way shadows stirred in the corners of the chamber. And yet, the ceiling did not collapse. No demons tore through the stone. The man spoke with strength, not fear, and for the first time, Elric wondered if words themselves carried power beyond curse. But power draws hunters. The gathering ended in chaos when soldiers descended into the tunnels. No horns were blown, no cries raised, but the clash of steel rang out like thunder in the dark. The rebels scattered, voices silenced under blades. Elric barely escaped with his life, his heart pounding as he fled through winding corridors, the echoes of screams chasing him into the night. The next morning, bodies were hung from the gates. Their throats were cut, tongues nailed to wooden boards beneath their feet. The warning was clear. Speech meant death. Yet still the voices spread. By now, the demons no longer waited for words. They prowled the streets at night, shadows seeping into homes, dragging victims away even in silence. The kingdom shook with storms that carried no rain but whispers, voices that clawed at the ears though no lips moved. The seals were failing. The silence itself was no longer enough to hold them. Lord Malrek appeared again in the archives, as if conjured by Aelric's thoughts. His voice was silk, smooth as ever, untouched by shadow. "It comes, boy," he said. "The old ones return. The time for silence ends, but not as you dream. This kingdom will not be freed by words of defiance. It will be ruled by those who know the true tongue. Serve me, and you will survive the storm. Resist me, and your voice will be the last you ever hear." Elric stared at him, fists clenched. He wanted to answer, to speak aloud the fury that burned in him, but his throat was locked, his courage chained. Malrek's smile widened as he left him trembling in the dark. That night, Elric heard it, the first true rebellion. From the southern quarter, voices rose, not whispers but shouts. Dozens, then hundreds, calling, crying, chanting against the silence. The sound shook the walls of the city, rattled its stones. Elric rushed to the rooftops and saw torches flaring, men and women screaming their defiance into the sky. And with every word, shadows surged, demons tearing from the earth to descend upon them. The battle was chaos. Voices cried out in terror and fury, swords clashed against beasts of shadow. Elric watched in horror as men were devoured, women dragged into the ground, children snatched by talons of smoke. But then, something else. A single man bellowed a phrase, not in their tongue, but in a word, older, harsher. The demon before him shrieked and fell to ash. Others took up the cry, fumbling with the alien syllables, driving back the monsters with sounds that seared the air. Hope and horror mingled in the streets. Speech had returned, but it came with chaos. The silence was broken, and the demons had returned in full. By dawn, the southern quarter was ash. Hundreds lay dead, but the survivors had voices, raw and bloodied, that could no longer be caged. And Elric knew, with a dread certainty, that the final chain was breaking. The age of silence was ending. The age of voices and demons had begun. We are quickly approaching the end of the season here on FM. I'm so glad you've joined me on this journey, and I hope you'll continue to join me. Hey, if you are enjoying these scary stories, please follow for more content. I release new episodes every Friday. You can also find me on social media and on a podcast platform. Thank you to all my supporters for your love and support. Your names are on screen now, and I will see you next time. The city burned with voices. What had begun as whispers in alleys had erupted into a storm that no law, no guard, no king could stop. Words filled the air, shouts, cries, chants, songs, as if centuries of silence had torn open at once. And with every word, demons poured forth. They came from cracks in the stones, from shadows that stretched too long, from the mouths of the dead. Streets drowned in smoke and screams, though some voices turned weapons, striking the creatures back with syllables of power none had known they carried. Elric ran through the chaos, clutching the stolen chronicle, his throat raw with fear. He had spoken at last, the sound barely more than a whisper, but enough to send shadows writhing. The words of the old tongue burned in him, half learned from the fragments he had pieced together. Yet he knew it was not enough. The seals were nearly gone. The demons did not just answer words anymore, they hungered for them, thrived on them. The silence had been prison, yes, but it had also been barrier. Now it lay shattered, and the old ones stirred. At the palace gates, Lord Malrek stood tall, his voice booming across the square. He spoke in the old tongue like a king, his words dragging the demons to heel. They swarmed at his feet, bowing like hounds. The people watched in terror as he proclaimed himself their savior, their true ruler. "Your king is nothing," he thundered. "Your silence has chained you too long. Bow to me, and I shall give you speech that commands gods and demons alike." The crowd wavered. Some knelt, others fled. Elric pushed through them, heart hammering. He knew the truth. The words Malrek spoke did not free them. They bound them deeper. Every syllable strengthened the old ones, tightening their grip on the world. The chronicle had made it clear. Only one word remained that could end the curse. A final whisper sealed away in the blood of kings. It would not command, it would not enslave, it would end. In the throne room, Elric found the old king slumped on his seat, crown heavy on his brow, lips pale. He had not spoken in his lifetime, nor had his father before him, but in his blood the last whisper was bound. Elric knelt, pleading with silent hands, showing him the chronicle, mouthing what he dared not say. The king's eyes filled with tears. For the first time, he opened his mouth. His voice was thin, cracked, as though unused for centuries. He spoke one word. Elric could not even comprehend it fully. A sound that was not sound. A breath that was not breath. The world shuddered. Outside, demons shrieked and dissolved, their shadows unraveling into ash. Malrek screamed as the syllables tore at him, his body splitting into smoke and flame. The red star that had burned above the kingdom winked out. Silence fell once more, not the heavy silence of fear, but the silence of aftermath. The king slumped lifeless upon his throne. The word had cost him his soul. Elric stumbled into the square. The people stood frozen, their voices stolen again, their throats aching with the weight of silence. They looked to him, to the dead king, to the ashes of Malrek's rebellion. No one spoke. No one dared. The curse was broken. Or was it reforged? Elric felt it in his chest. That last whisper had sealed the demons away, but it had sealed their voices too. Perhaps forever. Perhaps only until someone dared again. The silent kingdom endured, saved, condemned. And in the quiet, Elric wondered if one day another stranger would come, and the cycle would begin again.